When the white death of winter descended upon medieval Europe, the smartest survival strategy wasn't to build walls up toward the sky, but to dig down into the embrace of the earth. Just imagine that, standing on a frozen plain where the wind bites exposed skin in seconds, only to lift a heavy timber latch and descend into a hidden world of amber light and geothermal warmth. Before we step out of the cold, I'd love to welcome you into our circle of listeners. If you enjoy these journeys, please subscribe and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? It is truly wonderful to have companions from so many time zones gathering around our virtual fire. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we leave the modern world behind and travel back 1,000 years to discover how our ancestors turned the ground beneath their feet into a cozy fortress against the storm. To understand the genius of the underground house, we must first understand the terror of the world above it. We are stepping into a time when the climate itself had turned against humanity. Historians and climatologists refer to this era as the onset of the Little Ice Age. It was a period of global cooling that began to creep across the northern hemisphere, bringing with it winters of shocking severity. These were not the mild, slushy winters of the modern era. They were deep, biting, and relentless. The temperature dropped so low that the very geography seemed to freeze in place. Rivers that had flowed for centuries turned into highways of solid ice. The Baltic Sea froze. The ground hardened into iron. In northern Europe, the wind was the true enemy. Without the dense tree cover that had existed in prehistoric times, the wind could gather speed across the open tundra and deforested plains. It created a wind chill factor that was lethal. We know today that when the air temperature drops, the wind strips away the thin layer of heat our bodies generate. In the medieval era, this invisible thief could freeze exposed flesh in a matter of minutes. A farmer walking from his barn to his house might feel his nose and ears go numb before he even crossed the yard. The air was so cold it felt like it was burning. It carried the biting smell of ozone and the metallic temps of incoming snow. The traditional architecture of the time was struggling to cope. For centuries, people had built long houses. These were impressive structures, rising tall above the ground, with walls made of wattle and daub. Wattle is a woven lattice of wooden strips, and daub is the sticky combination of wet soil, clay, sand, animal dung, and straw used to seal it. In mild weather, this worked perfectly, but in the brutal cold of the Little Ice Age, the daub would freeze. As it froze, it expanded and cracked. The wind, searching for any weakness, would whistle through these cracks. It turned the home into a drafty cage. The mortality rates from this period tell a grim story. Between the 6th and 10th centuries, winter was a reaper. Hypothermia was a constant specter in the corner of the room. It was not just about feeling cold. It was about the caloric cost of staying alive. When a human body gets cold, it shivers. This involuntary muscle movement is the body's desperate attempt to generate heat, but shivering burns calories at an alarming rate. In a time when food was already scarce, wasting energy just to stop shaking was a death sentence. People were literally shivering away their survival reserves. This scarcity extended to fuel. We often imagine the medieval world as an endless forest, but around settlements, wood was precious. In heavily deforested regions or the wind-swept heathlands, finding firewood was a daily struggle. A large, drafty longhouse required a massive fire to keep the temperature above freezing. That meant hours of labor chopping and hauling wood in the snow. If the wood ran out, the house became a tomb. The month of January was known to the Saxons as the wolf month. It was a name earned through fear. This was the time when the deep snows drove the wolves out of the wildlands and closer to the villages, desperate for food. But the name also spoke to the predatory nature of the cold itself. It hunted the weak. Livestock were particularly vulnerable. A cow or a sheep was not just an animal. It was a bank account, a tractor, and a winter's supply of food all in one. If the cattle froze to death in the barns, the family would starve in the spring. Keeping them warm was as important as keeping the children warm. Inside the standard houses, there was another flaw. There was no glass. The Romans had used glass, but the technology had largely retreated with their empire. Windows in a peasant's home were simply holes cut into the wood, covered by wooden shutters. To get light, you had to open the shutter. But opening the shutter meant inviting the wolf month directly into your living room. The choice was between living in absolute darkness or freezing to death. Most chose the darkness. This physical reality created a deep cultural fear. In the Norse mythology of the region, the end of the world did not begin with fire. It began with winter. They called it Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. It was a winter that would last for 3 years, with no summer in between, a time when the sun would fail and the world would be buried in snow. Every time a particularly harsh frost settled on the eaves, or the timber frames of the house groaned under the weight of the snow, a quiet fear would rise in the hearts of the people. Was this it? Was this the beginning of the long night? The sound of that cold was distinct. It was the hollow, rattling sound of dry leaves skittering over frozen mud. It was the sharp crack of a tree limb snapping under the tension of the frost. It was the silence of a world where no birds sang. Standing outside, you could see your own breath misting in the air. It would drift up and instantly freeze on a beard or a woolen scarf, creating a mask of ice. Fingers would grow clumsy and stiff. Tying a simple knot became impossible. The cold seeped into the bones, a deep ache that heat could barely touch. It was clear that facing this enemy head-on, with walls built high into the screaming wind, was a losing battle. From the problem of the cold, we turn to the ingenious solution lying just beneath the turf. The answer was not to fight the wind, but to hide from it. This is where the Grubenhaus enters the story. The word comes from the German language. Grub means pit or cavity, and house means house. Quite literally, it is a pit house. This style of building spread across a vast stretch of geography. Archaeologists have found the stained earth remains of these structures from the fjords of Scandinavia down to the banks of the Danube River. They appear in the misty hills of England and the dense forests of Poland. Wherever the winter was cruel, the Grubenhaus was the shield. The construction of these sanctuaries began with a decision to dig. It was standard for these homes to be relatively small and intimate. A typical pit house measured about 3 meters by 4 meters. This small footprint was intentional. A smaller space is easier to heat. The builders would mark out a rectangle on the ground, usually in the late summer. It was crucial to break ground before the frost set in. Once the ground froze, it became as hard as stone, and digging would be impossible. The tools they used were simple but effective. They did not have the hydraulic excavators of our time. They had spades. Some of these spades were tipped with precious iron, cutting through the grass roots with a satisfying crunch. Others were made entirely of seasoned oak, hardened in fire to give them a cutting edge. The community would often gather for this phase. It was heavy, rhythmic labor. You can imagine the sound of the work, the heavy thud of the spade hitting the ground, the grunt of effort as a shovel load of heavy soil was heaved up and out of the pit. They dug down to a depth of roughly half a meter to a full meter. This sounds shallow, but it was significant. They were removing the topsoil, the dark, organic layer where the grass grew. Beneath that, they hit the subsoil. Often, this was clay or packed chalk. The smell of the work would be heavy in the air. It was the rich, damp scent of freshly turned earth. It is a smell that signals potential and growth. As the cooler autumn air hit the newly exposed soil, steam would rise from the pit, a visual promise of the warmth the earth held. There has been a long debate among historians about the floor of these houses. This is known as the sunken floor debate. For a long time, some scholars thought the pit was just an air cellar, and that the people lived on a wooden floor built above it. But as we have looked closer, the evidence suggests otherwise. The soil at the bottom of these pits is often packed hard, polished by the tread of thousands of footsteps. In the center, we find the scorch marks of hearths. It seems clear now that for many, the pit itself was the living room. They walked on the earth. They slept on the earth. The excavation revealed distinct layers in the soil. When archaeologists dig these sites today, centuries later, they find dark stains in the ground where the wood has long since rotted away. These stains are the ghosts of the house, telling us exactly where the walls stood. The digging phase was a time of connection. Neighbors would help neighbors. Hands calloused from the harvest would grip the rough wood of the spade handles. The texture of the rough dirt crumbling between fingers was a sensation of progress. They were not just digging a hole, they were carving out a pocket of survival. Once the rectangle was dug, the post holes were sunk. Usually, there were two main posts, one at each of the shorter ends of the rectangle. These were the gable posts. They were the anchors of the world. They had to be deep and strong, for they would hold the weight of the roof and the snow that would pile upon it. The builders would drop heavy timber trunks into these deep holes, packing them tight with stones and clay to keep them upright. These posts rising from the pit were the skeleton of the home. The emotional tone of this work was industrious and determined. There was a seriousness to it. They knew the snow was coming. Every shovelful of dirt moved was a victory against the future cold. They were building a foundation not just for a house, but for the safety of their kin. With the shell complete, the pit dug, and the posts standing tall like sentinels, we must raise the roof to seal the sanctuary. The design they used was the classic A-frame. It is a shape we still recognize today, sharp and triangular. But on a Grubenhaus, this roof sat incredibly low. Because the house was sunk into the ground, the eaves of the roof might touch the earth itself. From the outside, the house did not look like a building with walls. It looked like a large, peaked tent resting on the grass. This shape was a masterstroke of aerodynamics. A vertical wall catches the wind. It takes the full force of the gale, shuddering and leaking heat. But a low, sloping A-frame allows the wind to flow over it. The storm glides up the slope and over the ridge, leaving the structure undisturbed. The wind whistled over the roof rather than slamming into it. The roofing materials were harvested from the landscape. They used what the land provided. In the wetlands, they cut water red. In the fields, they gathered wheat straw. On the moors, they pulled up tough, wiry heather. Thatching is an art form. The material is bundled and laid in thick, overlapping layers. When done correctly, a thatched roof is watertight and incredibly warm. It is a blanket for the house. The golden color of fresh straw thatch would glint in the weak autumn sun, a beacon of brightness against the graying sky. To add even more insulation, they would often place turf sods on the roof. These were blocks of earth with the grass still growing on them. Over time, the grass would continue to grow, knitting the roof together with a living net of roots. In the spring, the house would bloom with wildflowers. It was a camouflage that blended the home back into the hill. There were no windows in this roof. A window is a hole in your insulation. They prioritized heat over light. The interior would be dark, a cave-like space, where the eyes had to adjust. The only opening was the smoke hole at the very peak of the ridge. This was essential. There was an open fire burning in the center of the pit, and the smoke needed an escape route. The dynamics of the smoke hole were tricky. It had to be large enough to let the gray plumes exit, but small enough to keep the precious heat from rushing out with it. It was a delicate balance of ventilation. Entry to the house was usually via a ramp or a short set of earthen steps cut into the ground. You did not walk into a Grubenhaus, you descended into it. The door itself was rarely a hinged wooden barrier as we know it. Wood hinges were complex and drafty. Instead, they often used a heavy curtain of animal hides. A thick, cured ox leather or bear skin would hang over the doorway. It was heavy and stiff. To enter, you had to push the leather aside, slip through, and let it slap back into place behind you, sealing the gap instantly. Inside, looking up, you would see the ridge beam. This was the spine of the house, a whole tree trunk running the length of the roof. It was often left rough, with the texture of the bark still visible. It felt strong and primal. The rafters coming down from it were lashed together with rope or leather thongs. The smell inside was distinct. It was the heavy, damp scent of wet moss used for chinking. Builders would take handfuls of moss and clay and jam them into any gap where the thatch met the earth. It was a process of airtight sealing. From the outside, these clusters of pit houses looked like small mounds on the landscape. They were humble, but inside, they were a revolution in comfort. The darkness before the first fire was lit was absolute, but once the hearth was kindled, the space transformed. The golden straw of the roof reflected the firelight, creating a warm amber glow that bathed everything in a soft radiance. With the shell complete, we examine why this specific design works so miraculously. It was not just about hiding from the wind, it was about harnessing the physics of the planet. The core concept is something we call the frost line. The earth is a battery for heat. The surface of the ground freezes. It gets covered in snow and ice. The temperature there might be well below zero, but the cold only penetrates so deep. If you dig down about 1 meter, you reach a point where the temperature stabilizes. The earth below this line stays at a constant temperature, roughly 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, or 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of what is happening up in the air. By digging the floor of the house down into this zone, the medieval builders were tapping into geothermal stability. The floor and the lower walls were not freezing cold. They were cool, yes, but they were significantly warmer than the freezing air outside. The earth was constantly radiating a low-level warmth into the house. It was a natural heater, that never ran out of fuel. Then there is the concept of thermal mass. The soil walls of the pit are dense. They absorb heat slowly and release it slowly. When a fire was lit inside the pit house, the heat didn't just disappear through the walls. The earth absorbed it. The walls themselves became warm, holding that energy and radiating it back into the room long after the fire had died down. It created a heat trap. Heat rises, as we know, in a high-ceilinged longhouse. The heat vanishes into the rafters, leaving the people cold on the floor. In the low Grubenhaus, the heat rose, hit the low thatched roof, and rolled back down to the people. You were living inside a pocket of warm air. This is the same principle used in modern root cellars to keep vegetables from freezing. But here, it was keeping families alive. The efficiency was staggering. Experiments in reconstructed pit houses have shown that they require 50% less firewood than an above-ground hut to maintain a comfortable temperature. In a world where gathering wood was a freezing, calorie-burning chore, this efficiency was a lifesaver. It meant half the work, half the exposure to the wolf month. We must also consider the occupants. A typical Grubenhaus might house 4 or 5 people. The human body is a radiator. We emit heat constantly in a small, well-insulated space like a pit house. The body heat of the family alone was enough to raise the temperature significantly. If you add a dog or a few sheep brought inside for protection, the temperature rises even further. There are historical accounts and modern experiments that describe a phenomenon that seems impossible for a medieval winter. People inside these houses would sweat while the storm raged outside, burying the village in snow. The people inside would be stripping off their heavy wool cloaks. The air would be thick and warm. The earth walls also regulated humidity. Winter air is often dry and harsh on the lungs, but the clay and soil moderated the moisture, keeping the air breathable and comfortable. And then there was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. Earth is an incredible acoustic insulator. Imagine the sensation. You have been outside gathering wood. The wind is screaming in your ears. The cold is stinging your eyes. You walk to the mound of the house. You push aside the heavy leather hide of the door. You step down the earthen ramp. As the leather flap falls back into place, the world changes. The wind is gone. The screaming silence of the storm is replaced by a muffled, heavy quiet. It is like wearing heavy earmuffs. The silence is profound. The air changes density. You feel it against your skin. It is still thick and welcoming. You smell the faint, pleasant scent of dry earth and roasted roots from the fire. Your shoulders drop. The tension of fighting the cold leaves your muscles. You are held in the hand of the earth. It is a feeling of safety that is primal. It is a scientific triumph of insulation, but to the people of the time, it must have felt like magic. It is fascinating to see how our ancestors solved problems with such elegance. They did not have central heating or fiberglass insulation, yet they conquered the winter with a shovel and some straw. I'd love to know what other aspects of medieval daily life you are curious about. Perhaps their food, their medicine, or their travel. Leave a suggestion in the comments as I build these stories based on your interests. The heavy timber door swings shut. The howling wind is cut off instantly. The world of biting frost and gray skies is left behind. Now there is only the interior. We have moved from the construction of the shelter to the life lived within it. The structure is done. The pit is dug. The roof is thatched. Now, it must be inhabited. The atmosphere inside the Grubenhaus is thick. It is a sensory experience that is entirely distinct from the world outside. The first thing you notice is the change in light. Outside, the winter sun reflects harshly off the snow. It is blinding and sharp, but here, the light is amber. It is soft. It is liquid. It struggles to penetrate the small gaps in the eaves. Instead, the room is lit by the central focus of the home. This is the hearth. The hearth is the heart of the pit. It sits in the center of the beaten earth floor. Sometimes it is placed against a wall reinforced with stone to reflect the heat, but usually it commands the middle of the room. It is the anchor. Everything revolves around it. The sleeping platforms line the walls. The workspace is near the door. But the fire is the center of gravity. Managing this fire was an art form. It was not a simple matter of throwing logs onto a pile. In a semi-subterranean house, smoke management is critical. If the fire burns too hot or too fast, the room fills with choking fumes. The ceiling is low. The space is enclosed. So, the fuel they chose was specific. They did not always use raw green wood that creates too much billowing smoke. Instead, they looked to the earth itself. They used peat. Peat is decayed vegetation dug from the bogs in the summer and dried in the sun. When it burns, it is different from wood. It does not crackle or pop. It burns with a deep red intensity. The scent of burning peat is distinct. It is sweet. It is earthy and pungent. It smells of ancient forests and deep soil. This scent would permeate everything. It settled into the wool of their clothes. It soaked into the timber of the walls. To enter a Grubenhaus was to be enveloped in this smell. It was the scent of safety. They also used dried dung from the livestock. This might sound strange to us, but when dried properly, it burns clean. It holds the heat for a long time, and heat was the goal. They were not looking for the bright, dancing flames of a campfire. They wanted the glow. They wanted a banking fire. A banking fire is built to last. The coals are raked together. They are covered with a layer of ash. This restricts the oxygen. The fire sleeps. It pulses with a dull red light. It releases a steady, constant wave of warmth. This radiant heat travels through the room. It warms the stones of the hearth. These stones act as thermal batteries. They absorb the heat during the day and release it slowly through the long, dark night. Imagine sitting there. You are close to the embers. Your face feels the warmth. It is a dry, prickling heat on your cheeks, but your back, turned towards the earthen wall, feels cool. The air circulates in a slow, lazy loop. Warm air rises from the center. It hits the thatched roof. It cools and slides down the walls. It creates a gentle draft that feeds the fire. Above you, the smoke drifts. It does not vanish immediately. It hangs in the rafters. It creates a blue haze near the roof. This was beneficial. The smoke cured the thatch. It hardened the straw and drove away insects. The soot coated the timbers, preserving them against rot. The house was seasoning itself, just like a cast iron pot. Cooking was a slow process here. A clay pot would sit nestled in the hot ashes. It bubbled softly. The sound was rhythmic, plop, plop. Inside was a pottage. This was the staple meal. It was a stew that never truly ended. Ingredients were added day by day. Oats, barley, peas, and perhaps a bit of salted pork. It simmered for hours. The flavors melded together into a thick, hearty sustenance. Fire safety was a constant thought. The room was small. The roof was made of dry straw. One stray spark could mean disaster. This is why the role of the firekeeper was so vital. Often, this was an elder, someone with patience, someone who did not need to run out into the fields. They sat by the hearth. They watched the embers. They fed the fire, one block of peat at a time. They were the guardians of the warmth. When the sun went down, the darkness was absolute. The fire offered a red glow, but it was not enough for work. For light, they used rushlights. These were simple reeds, stripped of their green skin and dipped in animal fat. They were clamped in iron holders. They burned with a small, sputtering flame. The light they cast was dim and yellow. It threw long, dancing shadows against the walls. The occupants of the room looked like giants in the flickering light. The hearth was more than a utility. It was an altar. It was the place where offerings were made to the household spirits. A small portion of the morning porridge might be tossed into the flames. A prayer might be whispered to the ancestors. The fire was a living thing. It needed to be fed. It needed to be respected. In the deep winter, the fire was the only sun they had, but the warmth served another purpose. The humidity of these spaces was not just for comfort, it was essential for industry. This brings us to the second great purpose of the Grubenhaus. It was a workshop. Specifically, it was the sanctuary of the weaver. Archaeologists have found the evidence. In the ruins of these pit houses, they find thousands of loom weights. These are rings of baked clay or carved stone. They lie in rows, exactly where they fell centuries ago. They tell us that these sunken rooms were the engines of textile production. Why weave underground? The answer lies in the physics of the fiber. The people of this time worked with flax and wool. Flax is used to make linen. It is a plant fiber. Wool comes from sheep. Both of these materials are sensitive to the air. In the winter, the air above ground is dry. The frost sucks the moisture out of the world. If you try to spin flax in dry air, it becomes brittle. The fibers snap. The thread breaks. It is frustrating and wasteful. But down in the pit house, the air is different. The earthen walls breathe moisture. The floor is damp. The humidity is trapped. In this damp air, the fibers relax. They become pliable. They can be twisted and spun into fine, strong thread. The pit house was a humidor for cloth. The centerpiece of this industry was the warp-weighted loom. It was a massive piece of machinery. It leaned against the wall, often near the door where the light was best. It did not have a pedal. It was a vertical frame. The long threads, called the warp, hung down from a top beam. To keep them straight and tight, the weavers tied heavy weights to the bottom of the bundles. These were the loom weights. Weaving was a communal activity. It was women's work, and it was social. They would gather in the pit house. It was often called the bower or the bureau in later centuries. It was a space separate from the main hall. Here they ruled. The sound of the weaving was the soundtrack of the winter. Listen to it. The rhythm is steady. The weaver passes the shuttle through the strings. Then she grabs the beater. This is a wooden sword or baton. She swings it up to push the new thread tight against the cloth. Thwack, thwack. Then the sound of the weights. As the threads move, the clay rings knock against each other. Clink, clunk. It was a hypnotic percussion. It filled the small room. Along with the noise of the loom, there was the sound of spinning. While one woman wove, others would sit on the benches. They held drop spindles. These were wooden rods with a weight on the end. They would tease out the wool from a distaff and spin the rod. It whirred softly. It spun like a top, twisting the wool into yarn. They sang as they worked. The rhythm of the work songs matched the beat of the loom. It kept the pace. It passed the time. The low humming of voices blended with the crackle of the fire. It was a hive of activity. The cloth they made was valuable. They produced a fabric called frieze. It was a rough, warm wool, often with a raised nap. It was water-resistant. It was prized across the seas. They also made vadmel. This was a coarse wool cloth that was so standard it was used as currency. In the north, you could pay your rent in lengths of vadmal. You could buy a cow with it. The women in the pit house were not just making clothes. They were printing money. The sensory details of this work were intense. The smell of raw wool is strong. It smells of lanolin. This is the natural grease found in sheep fleece. It is waterproof and heavy. The smell of the warm, greasy wool mixed with the smoke of the peat. There was also the smell of the dyes. To bring color to the gray winter, they dyed the wool. They used roots and plants. Madder root for red, woad for blue, weld for yellow, to set the dye. To make it stick to the wool, they needed a mordant. Often, they used stale urine. It sounds unpleasant to us, but it was a vital chemical resource. The ammonia set the color. The smell would linger faintly in the workshop, mixing with the sweet peat and the heavy musk of the wool. In the corner, a shaft of light might cut through the gloom. It would catch the dust motes dancing in the air. The dust was made of tiny fibers of wool and flax. The air was literally thick with their work. It coated their skin. It filled their lungs. It was a scene of intense focus and production, hidden away beneath the frost. But humans were not the only ones seeking refuge in the warm earth. The pit house was a sanctuary for all living things that the family possessed. In the deepest parts of winter, the line between the barn and the house blurred. The concept is known as the byre dwelling. A byre is a barn. In the harsh climates of northern Europe, keeping animals separate was a luxury. Animals are fragile. A prize cow or a good breeding sow represented wealth. If they froze to death, the family might starve. So they were brought inside. There was a symbiotic benefit to this. A cow is a massive creature. It produces an immense amount of body heat. A single cow can produce as much heat as a small fire. 500 watts of energy, radiating constantly. By bringing the animals into the pit house, the humans were installing living heaters. They were usually kept in a designated area, perhaps a lower section of the floor, or behind a woven screen of wattle. But the separation was thin. The air was shared. The soundscape of the house included the animals. There was the deep, resonant sound of a cow chewing her cud. It is a slow, rhythmic crunching. It is a sound of contentment. There was the soft rustling of straw as a goat shifted in its sleep. There was the heavy breathing of the livestock. It added a layer of white noise to the home. It made the space feel full. It made it feel alive. The smell was managed with care. The floor of the animal section was covered in deep straw. The humans would gather fresh herbs and rushes. They used meadowsweet. This is a flower with a sweet, almond-like scent. They scattered it on the floor to mask the odors. They used pine boughs for their crisp, clean smell. The result was a rustic blend. It smelled of hay, of animal musk, of pine, and of smoke. It was not a sterile smell, but it was a natural one. Small animals had the run of the place. Terriers and cats lived in the pit house. Their job was vital. The grain and the wool attracted mice and rats. The cats were the guardians of the food stores. You can imagine a cat curled up on a warm stone by the hearth, sleeping with one eye open, or a small terrier digging into the straw to chase a vole. At night, the dogs would sleep with the humans. They were the original hot water bottles. A heavy dog sleeping across your feet was a luxury. The heat was shared. The pack slept together. This proximity created a deep bond. The animals were not just tools. They were companions in the survival of the winter. There was a feeling of being grounded, of being part of a herd. When the storm howled outside and the wind tried to tear the roof off, the presence of the animals was reassuring. Their calm demeanor anchored the humans. If the cow was calm, the world was okay. With warmth and shelter secured, the final necessity was sustenance. We have spoken of the cooking, but the storage of food was just as important. The pit house was a fortress against hunger. The floor of the Grubenhaus served as a larder. We mentioned the cool air circulating, while the fire warmed the center. The edges of the room, down near the earth, remained cold. The ground temperature was stable. It acted as a natural refrigerator. They dug storage pits directly into the floor. These were small, circular holes. They lined them with clay or basketry. Inside, they stored the root vegetables, turnips, carrots, and parsnips. They packed them in sand. The sand kept them dry and stopped them from touching each other. This prevented rot from spreading. A turnip stored this way could last for months. They also used the rafters. The smoke that filled the roof was a preservative. They hung cuts of meat from the beams. Ham, bacon, and sausages dangled in the dark. The smoke cured them. It formed a protective rind on the meat. When you looked up, you saw the promise of dinner hanging above your head. Fermentation was the magic of the age. In the corner, there were ceramic crocks. Inside, cabbage was fermenting into sauerkraut. The salt and the natural bacteria turned the vegetable into something sour and long-lasting. There were jars of ale or mead. The yeast bubbled slowly in the cool corners. They stored dried fruits and nuts. Apples were sliced and dried on racks near the fire until they were leathery. Hazelnuts were gathered in the autumn and stored in sacks. These were the treats, the bursts of sugar and energy that broke the monotony of the pottage. Pests were the enemy. The food had to be protected. Grain was stored in ceramic jars with heavy lids. Baskets were suspended from the ceiling by ropes, keeping them out of reach of the mice. The larder was a fortress within a fortress. There is a psychological comfort in this. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. The fire is a low glow. You look around the room. You see the sacks of grain. You see the smoked meat. You see the jars of pickles. You know that you have enough. The snow can pile up against the door. The frost can kill the crops outside. But in here, you are prepared. The larder created a visual of abundance. It was a clutter of survival. It was not minimalist. Every inch of space was used to store life. The smell of the larder was distinct. It was sharp and briny from the pickles. It was rich and savory from the smoked meat. It was dusty from the dried herbs hanging in bundles. This was the ecosystem of the pit house. It was a tight and closed loop. The fire warmed the people. The people tended the animals. The animals warmed the room. The moisture allowed the weaving. The weaving clothed the people. The food fueled the work. It was a small world, perhaps only 4 meters by 3 meters. but it contained everything needed for life. It was cozy, it was safe, it was home. As the physical needs are met, we settle in for the long, psychological journey of the winter. The body is warm, the belly is full, and the work is steady. Now, the mind can wander. There is something deeply instinctual about a small, cozy space filled with provisions. I wonder, do you have a favorite cozy corner in your home where you feel most safe and relaxed? A reading nook, or perhaps just a warm bed. It's a feeling that hasn't changed in 1,000 years. The deep winter has now fully descended. The world above the ground has been erased. It is buried beneath a white uniform blanket that stretches to the horizon. But down here, in the hollow of the earth, life continues. The pace of existence has slowed to a crawl. The frantic energy of the harvest is a distant memory. The urgent work of waterproofing and sealing the home is done. Now there is only the waiting. We have entered the time of the long night. In the heart of the pit house, the fire is the center of the universe. It is the sun, the moon, and the stars, all at once. The family gathers close to its warmth. The heavy wooden door is barred against the cold. The air is thick and still. There is nowhere to go. There is no work that can be done in the frozen fields. And so the people turn to one another. When the hands are idle, the mind must be fed. This is the season of the story. In a world without books, without screens, and without electric light, the human voice becomes the most powerful tool of all. It is the primary form of entertainment, but it is also much more than that. It is the vessel of history. It is the way the ancestors speak to the living. Imagine the scene. The room is dim, lit only by the flickering orange glow of the hearth. Shadows dance on the earthen walls. They stretch and twist, becoming giants and monsters in the corner of your eye. An elder sits on a pile of furs near the fire. He is the Scribe, the shaper of words, the keeper of tales. The children sit at his feet. Their eyes are wide and reflecting the flames. The adults lean back against the wooden posts that hold up the roof. They have heard these stories before. They have heard them 100 times, but that does not matter. In the winter, repetition is a comfort. It is a ritual. The storyteller begins. His voice is low at first. It rumbles like the earth itself. He does not just speak, he chants. He weaves a rhythm into the air. The Germanic languages of this time are built for poetry. They are full of hard consonants and rolling vowels. They are languages of percussion. He uses the old tricks of his trade. He speaks in riddles and kennings. He does not simply say the sea. He calls it the whale road. He does not say the sun. He calls it the sky candle. He does not say a battle. He calls it the storm of swords. These poetic metaphors force the listeners to engage. They make the mind work. They turn the ordinary world into something magical and strange. Tonight, he tells a story of heroes. He speaks of a warrior who faced a monster in the dark. He describes the creature's glowing eyes and its iron claws. The listeners hold their breath. The silence in the room is absolute. The only sound is the snap of a burning log. The shadows on the wall seem to leap forward as the monster attacks. The storyteller raises his voice. He mimics the roar of the beast. He mimics the clash of steel on bone. The children clutch their blankets tighter. The adults nod in appreciation of the performance. For a moment, the pit house disappears. The cold floor and the smoky air are gone. The listeners are transported. They are standing in a great mead hall. They are watching the hero triumph. They are sharing a single, collective dream. This is the power of the oral tradition. It suspends time. It pushes back the walls of the room. It makes the small world of the winter feel vast and infinite. These stories serve a purpose beyond entertainment. They are the school of the tribe. Through the tales of gods and giants, the children learn right from wrong. They learn that courage is praised. They learn that cowardice is punished. They learn the names of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers. They learn where they came from. The storyteller spins tales of the gods. He speaks of the thunder god who protects the common man. He speaks of the one-eyed wanderer who seeks wisdom at any cost. He speaks of the beautiful goddess who brings the spring. These are not just characters. They are the forces of nature that govern their lives. Sometimes the stories are funny. They are bawdy tales of tricksters and fools. Laughter bubbles up in the small room. It is a warm, defiant sound against the cold outside. Laughter heats the blood. It chases away the gloom that can settle in the mind during the long months of darkness. As the hour grows late, the stories change. The rhythm becomes softer. The voice of the storyteller drops to a murmur. He begins to recite the long, repetitive genealogies of the clan. The list of names goes on and on. It is hypnotic. It is a lullaby of history. One by one, the eyelids in the room grow heavy. The fire burns down to glowing embers. The shadows stop dancing and settle into the corners. The magic of the story fades, leaving behind a sense of peace. The listeners drift from the waking dream of the tale into the sleeping dream of the night. But when the voice finally stops, something else takes over. It is a presence that is just as powerful as the story. It is the silence. We live in a noisy world. Our modern lives are filled with a constant, low-level hum. We hear the distant roar of traffic. We hear the buzz of electricity in the walls. We hear the whir of fans and motors. True silence is something we rarely experience. But here, in the pit house, the silence is physical. It has weight. It has texture. You must remember where we are. We are half buried in the ground. The walls are made of thick, packed earth. The roof is piled high with thatch and maybe even turf. And on top of everything, there is the snow. Snow is a miraculous insulator. It is trapped air held in frozen crystals. When it covers the landscape, it changes the acoustics of the world. It absorbs sound waves. It dampens vibration. A thick layer of snow acts like a heavy velvet curtain drawn across the earth. Outside, the wind might be howling. It might be tearing at the trees in the forest. But down here, that sound is muffled. It is a distant, harmless whoosh. It sounds like the ocean heard from far away. It does not penetrate the sanctuary of the earth. Inside the house, the silence amplifies the smallest sounds. The senses become heightened. You become aware of the rhythm of your own existence. You hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of the livestock in the partitioned stall. The slow inhale and exhale of a cow is a comforting, steady metronome. You hear the rustle of straw as a child turns in their sleep. You hear the settling of the wooden beams as they adjust to the temperature. A soft creak, a gentle groan of timber. You hear the fire, not just the crackle, but the hiss of escaping gas. The soft crumbling of a log as it turns to ash. These sounds are microscopic. In the modern world, they would be lost. Here, they are loud. They are distinct. This acoustic isolation creates a unique psychological state. it forces introspection. When there is no noise to distract you, you are left with your own thoughts. The mind wanders. It drifts. This is the winter stillness. It is a form of hibernation for the spirit. People in this time did not fear this silence. They embraced it. It was the necessary counterweight to the hard labor of the summer. The summer was for the body. The winter was for the mind. Sometimes you might hear a sound from the surface. Perhaps a deer walks over the roof of the pit house. The sound of hoofsteps crunching on the snow overhead is dull and muted. Thump, thump, thump. It is a reminder that the world is still there, but it feels separate. It feels like a different dimension. There is a sense of safety in this silence. The earth walls block out the high-frequency noises of danger. A snapping twig, a shout, a predator's cry. Those sounds do not reach you here. You are cocooned. You are held in the palm of the earth. The dripping of meltwater becomes a clock. If the heat from the fire warms the roof enough to melt the bottom layer of snow, you might hear a slow, rhythmic drop. Drip, pause, drip, pause. It counts the seconds. It measures the slow passage of the night. This silence is not empty. It is full of rest. It is a healing silence. It allows the nervous system to reset. The constant vigilance required for survival relaxes. The heartbeat slows down. The breathing deepens. The body syncs its rhythm with the slow, dormant pulse of the land. And yet, deep in the heart of winter, there comes a moment when the silence must be broken. It must be shattered with joy. The days have been getting shorter and shorter. The sun is a pale, weak disk that barely climbs above the trees. The darkness is growing stronger. The ancient people watched this with a primal anxiety. What if the sun never returns? What if the darkness wins? To fight this fear, they held the great midwinter feast. We know it as Yule. It is the turning point of the year. It is the celebration of the solstice. It is the defiant shout of life in the face of the white death. The preparations begin days in advance. The mood in the pit house shifts. The lethargy of the deep winter is replaced by a buzz of anticipation. The best food has been saved for this moment. The centerpiece of the celebration is the Yule log. This is not a small piece of firewood. It is a massive trunk. It is the root of a great oak or ash tree. It is dragged from the forest with great effort. It requires the strength of the whole family, perhaps even the neighbors. Getting it through the door of the pit house is a struggle. There is grunting and heaving. There is laughter as it gets stuck and has to be twisted. But finally, it is brought to the hearth. It is lit with the remains of the previous year's log. This represents the continuity of life. The fire passes from the old year to the new. As the great log catches, the flames leap high. The light in the pit house doubles, then triples. The shadows are banished. For the first time in months, the house is truly bright. Then nature is brought inside. Branches of evergreen are carried down into the earth. Pine, fir, holly. These are the plants that refuse to die. They stay green when the rest of the world is gray. They are magic. The scent of the pine needles hits the warm air. It is sharp and fresh. It cuts through the smell of smoke and animals. It smells like the forest. It smells like life. The small space is suddenly filled with the perfume of the wild. And then there is the feast. If the family is lucky, they have saved a pig for this day. The smell of roasting pork fills the room. The fat sizzles and drops into the fire. It is a rich, heavy scent that makes the mouth water. In a diet of grain and porridge, fresh meat is a luxury beyond compare. But the most important part of Yule is the drink. The ale has been brewing for weeks. It is strong and dark. It is sweetened with honey. The concept of drinking Yule is central to the festival. It is a toast to the gods. The horn is filled and passed around the circle. They toast to the god of the harvest, asking for fertility in the coming year. They toast to the memory of their ancestors. They toast to the return of the sun. The ale warms the belly. It loosens the tongue. The small, cramped space of the pit house becomes a hall of celebration. Neighbors crowd in. The boundaries between families dissolve. Everyone is squeezed together on the benches and furs. The body heat raises the temperature of the room until it is positively tropical. Laughter rings out. It is louder than usual. It is boisterous. People slap the tables. They sing songs. They shout riddles. The silence of the winter is chased away by the sheer volume of human joy. This is a psychological necessity. The winter is long and hard. Depression and cabin fever are real dangers. The midwinter feast is the antidote. It is a reminder that there is still pleasure in the world. It creates a spike of dopamine that helps carry the people through the remaining months of cold. There is a solemn side to the feast as well. This is the time of the BLT, the sacrifice. To get something, you must give something. A portion of the meat is cast into the fire for the gods. A splash of ale is poured onto the earth floor. It is a bargain. We give you this so that you will give us spring. Outside, the wind might be screaming. The legends say that this is the night of the wild hunt. Spectral riders gallop across the sky, hunting for souls. It is a terrifying thought. But inside, down in the earth, the people are safe. They are warm. They are full of food and drink. They are together. The feast lasts deep into the night. Eventually, the songs die down. The ale runs dry. The great Yule log burns down to a glowing bed of coals that will stay warm for days. The guests stumble back to their own homes or fall asleep where they sit. The celebration is over, but the feeling remains. The sun has turned the corner. The days will now get longer, minute by minute, day by day. The worst is over. After the feast, the long drift towards spring begins. It is a slow process. The winter does not give up its grip easily. There are still storms. There are still freezing nights. But the mood has changed. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Slowly, imperceptibly, the world begins to shift. The first sign is the light. The angle of the sun changes. For months, the light entering the door has been a flat, gray beam. Now, it starts to brighten. It reaches further across the dirt floor. It illuminates corners that have been in shadow since autumn. Dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight. They look like tiny stars. Then comes the sound. The silence of the snow begins to break. The dripping becomes constant. It is no longer a slow rhythm. It is a fast, chaotic patter. The icicles hanging from the eaves begin to weep. The air changes. It grows heavy. It feels wet. The dry, crisp cold of the deep winter is replaced by a damp, raw chill. It is the smell of the thaw. One morning, the master of the house unbars the door and pushes it open. He steps up from the pit and onto the surface level. He blinks. The light is blinding. The sun reflects off the melting snow with a dazzling brilliance. It hurts the eyes. It takes a moment to adjust. The world is transforming. Patches of brown earth are poking through the white. They look ugly and muddy, but to the medieval eye, they are beautiful. They are the soil returning. The smell is intense. It is the scent of petrichor. It is the smell of wet earth, rotting leaves, and new growth. It is a thick, organic perfume. It smells like biology waking up. The man takes a deep breath. The air is fresh. It has a breeze that moves. It is not the stagnant, smoky air of the pit house. It feels clean in the lungs. It wakes up the blood. He listens, and there it is, the sound that breaks the spell of winter. A bird is singing. It is a clear, sharp trill. It cuts through the damp air. It is not a call of distress. It is a territorial song. It is a song of mating. Life is starting again. The family emerges from the earth. They are pale. Their eyes are sensitive. They are covered in soot. They look like creatures from the underworld coming up for air. They stretch their limbs. The confinement is over. The work begins immediately. The livestock are brought out. They are thin, their coats shaggy and matted. They blink in the sun, sniffing the wet air. They need to be checked for rot, for sickness, but they have survived. The roof of the pit house needs repair. The heavy snow has damaged the thatch. There are leaks to plug. The drainage ditches need to be cleared of mud so the melting water does not flood the home. Inside, the spring cleaning begins. The old rushes on the floor, matted with a winter's worth of debris, are swept out. The soot is scrubbed from the stones. The air is allowed to circulate. The house is purged of the long confinement. It is a time of incredible energy. The body wakes up from its lethargy. The muscles ache for movement. The cycle of the year has completed its turn. The death of winter has passed. The rebirth of spring has arrived. And so the people of the earth emerged, blinking into the pale spring sun, having survived the white death not by fighting it, but by sleeping beneath it. They had turned the ground into a womb, a place of safety and warmth where life could wait out the storm. As we leave them to their spring, we can carry with us that sense of deep, protected comfort. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden history of winter, please consider liking the video, as it helps our community grow. But now, let us drift further, leaving the narrative behind for a quiet reflection on the shadows that remain. We have spent a long time within the warm, smoky embrace of the sunken house. We have sat by its fire, listened to the rhythm of the loom, and watched the seasons turn beyond the low eaves. But now, the fire has burned down to embers. The stories of the people who lived here have faded into the quiet hum of history. The noise of daily life has stopped. Now we step out of the timeline of the living and into the vast, calm timeline of the earth itself. We are no longer watching a family survive the winter. We are watching the slow, deep breathing of the land as it remembers them. This is the architecture of silence. When we walk across the landscape of modern Europe, through the green pastures of England or the open plains of Germany, we might think we are walking on untouched ground. The grass is thick, the hills are rolling and smooth, but beneath our feet, the soil holds a memory. We are walking over a ghost map, a hidden geography of thousands upon thousands of these sunken homes. They do not stand as stone ruins or towering castle walls. They do not break the horizon. Instead, they sleep beneath it. The way we find them is a study in patience and subtle observation. To the untrained eye, a field is just a field. But to the archaeologist, the ground is a manuscript written in layers of dirt. The primary way these houses reveal themselves is through what is known as a negative feature. When the house was built, the builders dug a pit. They disturbed the chalk, or the clay, or the sand. They cut into the natural, compacted layers of the earth. Centuries later, long after the house has rotted away and the pit has been filled in with topsoil and debris, that disturbance remains. It appears as a shadow in the subsoil. If you were to peel back the green turf, you would see the natural, light-colored earthy yellow of clay or the white of chalk, and there, stark and unmistakable, would be dark circles. These are the ghosts of the post holes. This is where the great timber trunks once stood, anchoring the roof against the storm. The wood is gone, eaten by time and bacteria, but the soil that filled the hole is different. It is richer, it is darker. It is stained by the organic matter of the tree that once stood there. These dark circles form a pattern, a blueprint stamped into the earth, marking the corners and the ridgelines of a home that vanished 1,000 years ago. Sometimes we do not even need to dig to see them. Nature itself acts as the historian. There is a phenomenon known as crop marks, which can only be seen from high above. Imagine flying slowly over a field of ripening wheat in the late summer. The sun is low, casting long shadows. Most of the crop stands at the same height, a sea of gold. But in certain places, the grain grows taller. It stays greener for longer. This is because the roots of these particular plants have found the old filled-in pits of the sunken houses. The soil in these pits is looser and deeper than the surrounding ground. It holds more moisture. It allows the roots to travel further down, drinking from the reservoir of the past. And so, the wheat grows high over the ghost of the house. From the air, you can see the perfect outlines of villages' squares and rectangles of taller, greener grass painted onto the dry field. It is a phantom map, visible only for a few weeks a year before the harvest comes to sweep it away. It is a gentle reminder that the earth feeds the present with the nutrients of the past. When gentle hands finally brush away the dust of these sites, the artifacts found within the fill tell a story of abandonment. We find the things that were lost or broken. We find the fragments of a bone comb, its teeth snapped off by a careless tug on a tangled knot. We find the heavy clay weights of the warp-weighted loom lying in a line exactly where they fell when the wooden frame rotted and collapsed. We find shards of pottery, the coarse, unglazed vessels that once held water or ale, now returned to the clay from which they were made. These objects are found in what archaeologists call the fill. This is the soil that slowly washed into the pit after the house was left to ruin. It is a mixture of wind-blown dust, decaying leaves, and the crumbling remains of the walls. Excavating it is a slow, meditative process. It requires a small trowel, a soft brush, and an infinite amount of patience. The archaeologist scrapes away the dirt millimeter by millimeter, watching for the slight change in texture that signals a piece of rusted iron or a fragment of glass. There is a profound silence in this work. It is the silence of the museum case or the quiet of a library. When you hold a piece of rusted iron that was once a knife, you are touching a specific moment in time. You can feel the texture of the corrosion, the rough orange surface that was once smooth, gray steel. You can imagine the hand that sharpened it, but the hand is gone. Only the metal remains, waiting in the dark for 1,000 years to be found. We have tried to bridge this gap between the ruin and the reality. In places like Westow in England, historians have undertaken the massive task of reconstruction. They have taken the patterns of the dark post holes and raised new timbers. They have thatched new roofs and dug new pits. This experimental archaeology is not just about building, It is about testing the decay. They watch how the wood ages. They see how the smoke from the hearth coats the thatch in soot. They learn how the house settles into the ground. Walking into one of these reconstructed villages is like stepping into a dream. You see the houses as they were, sitting low in the grass, their roofs like overturned boats. But there is a stillness to them. They are museums, not homes. They lack the chaos of life, the barking dogs, the crying children, the smell of cooking stew. They stand as silent monuments to a way of life that was once universal. They teach us that the archaeological record is fragile. The wood rots, the thatch turns to humus, the leather disintegrates. Only the stone and the shadow in the soil remain. This shadow is not limited to a single corner of the world. If we were to drift upwards and look down upon the map of Europe and beyond, we would see these sunken footprints stretching across the entire continent. The Grubenhaus was not a unique invention of one tribe. It was a logical answer to a universal problem, the cold. Let us drift east to the vast, wind-swept steppes of Russia and the Slavic lands. Here, the winters are long and brutal. The wind howls across the flat plains with nothing to break its speed. In these lands, the sunken house was known as the Zemlyanka. The name itself comes from the word for earth. These were often dug deeper than their western cousins. Sometimes, imagine the landscape of a Slavic winter. The world is a canvas of white and gray. The sky is low and heavy. To survive here, you must retreat. The Zemlyanka was a womb in the earth. The soil acted as a thick blanket, insulating the family from the biting frost. Inside, down the steps cut into the hard clay, the air was still. The wind could scream overhead, but deep in the ground, the temperature remained constant. It was a place of hibernation, a survival strategy borrowed from the bear and the badger. Now, let our minds travel north to the jagged coastlines of Scandinavia. Here, the Vikings built their own variation, the Grofus, in great trading centers like Hiddeby, which sat at the base of the Jutland Peninsula. These sunken buildings were everywhere, but here they often served a specific purpose. They were the workshops. Hiddeby was a bustling, noisy place of commerce. Ships from all over the known world docked at its piers. But behind the main halls, the sunken houses hummed with industry. The weavers, the comb-makers, and the glass bead crafters worked in these pits. Why? Because the sunken floor kept the air humid. For a weaver working with flax or wool, this humidity was essential. It kept the fibers pliable. It prevented the thread from snapping. And so, the Vikings dug into the damp earth to create the perfect atmosphere for their craft. Cross the gray, heaving waters of the North Sea to the green hills of England. Here, the Anglo-Saxons dotted the landscape with thousands of these structures. In the misty mornings of the English countryside, they appeared as small mounds in the fog. They were often ancillary buildings, standing in the shadow of the great timber halls. They were the weaving sheds, the storage huts, the sleeping quarters for the servants. They were the humbler cousins of the high hall, but they were the backbone of the village. Travel further still to the volcanic island of Iceland. Here, trees were scarce. The great forests of the mainland did not exist. And so, the sunken house evolved into the turf house. The settlers used what the land gave them, volcanic rock and thick, matted sod. They built thick walls of earth, stacking blocks of turf like bricks. The houses looked like extensions of the hills themselves, covered in living grass. In Iceland, this tradition lasted for centuries. long after it had faded in Europe. The insulation of the turf was the only defense against the North Atlantic gales. Inside a turf house, surrounded by feet of earth, the silence was absolute. The storm could rage outside, but the thick walls absorbed the sound, leaving the interior quiet and calm. We can even look across the ocean to the vast plains of North America. When settlers arrived there in the 19th century, they found a landscape with few trees. And what did they do? They remembered the old instinct. They built sod houses. They cut bricks from the prairie grass, tangled with deep roots, and built low, thick-walled homes. It was a convergent evolution. Confronted with the wind and the cold, the human response is always the same. Dig down, wrap yourself in the earth. Even the Inuit of the high Arctic built semi-subterranean winter houses. They used the ribs of whales to support roofs of turf and snow. They entered through long, sunken tunnels that trapped the cold air. In the harshest climate on Earth, the strategy was identical. The design is universal because the physics are universal. The Earth is warmer than the air in winter, and cooler than the air in summer. To dig is to survive. From the black earth of the Ukraine to the white chalk of Sussex, from the sandy soil of Denmark to the volcanic grit of Iceland, the story is written in the ground. It is a story of varying textures, the gritty feel of sand, the slickness of wet clay, the crumbly nature of peat. But in every soil, the shape is the same: a hollow, a hearth, and a roof. But history is a river that never stops flowing. Eventually, the current shifted. Humanity began to move upward. We started to leave the earth behind. The age of the sunken house began to fade, replaced by the age of the wall and the tower. Why did we stop living in the ground? The answer lies in a mixture of technology and pride. One of the greatest shifts was the invention and spread of the chimney. In the old sunken houses, the fire sat in the center of the room. The smoke drifted up to the rafters, filtering slowly out through the thatch. It was a smoky, hazy existence. The eyes stung. The lungs filled with soot. It was warm, yes, but the air was thick. When masons learned to build stone fireplaces with flues that sucked the smoke up and out, everything changed. Now, a house could have multiple stories. You could build a second floor without suffocating the people above. You could partition rooms. The great timber frames began to rise higher. We traded the insulation of the earth for the clear air of the chimney. Status played a role as societies became more stratified. Living high became a symbol of power. The Lord did not want to step down into a pit to sleep. He wanted to walk up steps into a hall. He wanted to look down on his lands. The sunken house became associated with the poor, the serf, the weaver. It became the mud hut, a term of derision. To live in the ground was to be like an animal. To live above it was to be a master of nature. There were practical reasons as well. Timber posts set directly into the earth eventually rot. The dampness of the soil seeps into the wood. By building on stone foundations, by lifting the timber frame up off the ground, the buildings lasted longer. The air was drier. The clothes did not smell of mildew. We gained longevity and height, but we lost thermal efficiency. The great halls of the later Middle Ages were grand, certainly. They were airy and impressive, but they were also drafty and cold. A stone castle is a refrigerator in the winter. The vast fireplaces roared with coal and heavy logs, but the heat escaped through the high ceilings and the uninsulated walls. We wrapped ourselves in tapestries and furs to compensate. We burned more fuel. We accepted the cold as the price of grandeur. The transition was slow. For a long time, the sunken houses remained as cellars or storage sheds. We kept our beer and our cheese underground, even if we slept upstairs. We knew, instinctively, that the earth was the best place to keep things at a stable temperature. But the living spaces moved up. The pits were filled in with trash and rubble. The ground was leveled. The villages became towns, and the towns became cities, paved with cobblestones that sealed the earth away completely. The smell of the air changed. The sweet, earthy scent of peat and wood smoke was replaced by the sharp, acrid tang of coal. The sound of rain hitting soft thatch was replaced by the hard rattle of rain on slate and tile. The organic, curved lines of the village straightened into the rigid grid of the city. We had separated ourselves from the soil, and yet the idea never truly died. It just slept. It waited in the collective memory of our species. In the modern world, amidst the steel and glass of our skyscrapers, we are seeing a quiet echo of the sunken house return. We are remembering the wisdom of the pit. In the deserts of New Mexico, architects build earthships. These are homes built into the side of berms, using tires and earth to create thick thermal mass walls. They face the sun to gather heat, and they hug the earth to keep it. These modern builders talk of passive solar and thermal mass, using the language of science to describe what the Anglo-Saxon peasant knew by feeling. They know that a house wrapped in earth stays warm in winter and cool in summer without the need for roaring furnaces or air conditioners. The physics have not changed in 2,000 years. The earth is still the best insulator we have. We see it in the green roofs that are sprouting on city buildings. We plant gardens on top of our offices, adding a layer of soil and grass to absorb the rain and insulate the roof. We are putting the sod house back on top of the skyscraper. We see it in the design of modern wine cellars and cheese caves, where we still go underground to find that perfect, steady, cool. There is a psychological appeal to it as well. In a world that is loud, bright, and fast, we crave the sensation of being tucked in. We love the stories of hobbits living in comfortable holes in the ground, with round doors and well-stocked pantries. These stories resonate with us deeply. They speak to a primal desire for safety, for a place where the wind cannot reach us, where the walls are thick and the world is quiet. Walk into the basement archives of a great library. The air is still, the temperature is controlled. The noise of the street above is muffled to a distant hum. You are surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust. It is a sanctuary. It is the same feeling that the weaver felt in the workshop at Hibernate, separation from the chaos, a return to the womb of the earth. The architecture of silence has never left us. We have just repurposed it. But let us return one last time to the original house. Let us visualize its final moments long ago. Let us watch the ruins return to nature. The family has left. Perhaps they moved to a new house on the hill, or perhaps the village moved away entirely. The fire in the hearth goes out for the last time. The ash turns cold. The door is left ajar, creaking on its leather hinges in the autumn wind. Winter comes. Snow drifts through the open doorway, settling on the dirt floor. The thatch on the roof, unmaintained, begins to hold water. Moss starts to grow in the thick straw, turning the golden roof to a dull green. The heavy timbers, the ridgepole, and the posts soak up the moisture. The rot begins, slow, and silent. Fungi bloom in the dark joints of the wood. Spring arrives, and birds pull strands of straw from the roof to build their nests. The thatch thins. A heavy summer rainstorm finally breaks the back of the roof. With a soft, heavy sigh, the ridgepole snaps. The roof collapses inward. It does not crash, it slumps. The thatch falls into the pit, covering the hearth and the floor in a tangled blanket of straw and wood. Years pass, the wood softens. It becomes spongy and indistinguishable from the soil. Beetles and worms break it down, turning the oak and the straw into rich, dark compost. The pit is now just a depression in the ground, a shallow bowl filled with rotting vegetation. Leaves from the nearby trees drift into the hollow. Layer after layer of autumn leaves accumulate, decomposing into leaf mold. The wind blows dust and sand into the pit. Slowly, the depression begins to fill. Wildflowers find the rich soil. Weeds and nettles spring up, growing taller and greener here than in the surrounding grass. A badger might dig a den in the soft earth of the bank, finding the old entrance ramp a convenient path. Foxes might curl up in the shelter of the hollow. Life continues, but it is the quiet life of the wild. Decades turn into centuries. The rain smooths the edges of the pit. The sharp corners of the excavation are rounded off by the frost and the thaw. The worms churn the soil, mixing the fill with the clay. The depression becomes shallower and shallower. Eventually, the turf grows over the top. The grass creates a seamless carpet, knitting the wound in the earth closed. The house has vanished. It has been digested by the land. All that remains is a gentle indentation, a slight dip in the field that you might not even notice unless the sun was low and the shadows were long. The carbon from the timber has returned to the air. The nitrogen from the thatch has returned to the soil. The iron knife dropped by the fireside has rusted into a stain. The pottery shards are held tight in the clay, waiting. The village is gone. The voices are silent. All that remains is the gentle indentation in the grass, a cradle where life once gathered warmth against the cold. The history books may close, but the earth remembers. It holds the shape of the sanctuary, preserving the quiet peace of those who slept there. Now we let the history fade into a soft blur, drifting from the human story to the deeper, slower rhythm of nature itself. We have walked through the villages of the past. We have seen the smoke rise from the hearths and listened to the voices of history. But now we leave the human world behind. We leave the timeline of kings and builders, of weavers and warriors. We step away from the noise of civilization. We walk out of the village, past the edge of the fields, and into the wild, silent places. Here, there is no clock to watch. There is no calendar to mark. There is only the deep, slow rhythm of the earth itself. We are going to find the places where the world sleeps. We are going to sink into the hibernation of nature. Imagine, for a moment, that you are no longer standing on the ground. You are sinking into it. You are becoming small. You are becoming a single seed. You are buried deep within the soil. Above you, the wind might be howling. The snow might be driving hard against the frozen ground. But down here, you know nothing of that. You are held in the dark, comforting embrace of the earth. The soil is not just dirt. It is a thick, heavy blanket. It presses against you from all sides, but it does not crush. It holds. It secures. It is a sensation of absolute safety. There is no light here. The sun is a distant memory, a concept that does not apply to this world of shadow. The darkness is absolute, and it is restful. It is the velvet curtain pulled tight against the stage of the world. You are encased in a hard, protective shell. This is your armor. It keeps the moisture out. It keeps the life inside you safe and suspended. You are a vessel of potential energy, waiting. But there is no rush to release it. There is no urgency to grow. The command of the season is to wait, to rest, to sleep. Time moves differently here in the subsoil. A day passes like a single breath. A week is merely a pause. The seasons turn slowly, a great wheel revolving in the sky above. But down here, the temperature is constant. It is cool, but not freezing. It is the temperature of a cellar, steady and unchanging. You are insulated by inches, perhaps feet, of loam and clay. The frost tries to reach down with its icy fingers, but the earth protects you. The frost stops at the surface, unable to penetrate this deep sanctuary. Inside the shell, all processes have stopped. You are not breathing in the way a lung breathes. You are existing. You are dormant. It is a state of suspended animation, a magical pause in the cycle of life. There is no hunger. There is no thirst. There is only being. You are heavy. You are still. You are anchored in the dark, waiting for a signal that is months away. And until that signal comes, until the warmth returns to the soil, your only job is to sleep. Let us drift now. Let us expand from the microscopic seed to something larger. Let us move from the soil to the cave. We are in the high mountains now. The air outside is thin and biting. The snow is piled high, drifting against the granite cliffs. But we are not outside. We are inside the deep recess of a bear's den. The entrance to the den is small, barely wide enough for a body to squeeze through. And now the snow has done its work. The wind has blown the white powder over the opening. It has sealed the door. The world outside is white and blinding, but inside it is pitch black. The snow acts as a seal, an insulator, locking the warmth in and keeping the cold out. The den is a pocket of air trapped in the mountain. Here lies the bear, a massive shape in the darkness. It is curled into a tight ball, nose tucked under a tail, paws pulled in close. It is a mountain of fur. The scent here is earthy and rich. It smells of dry pine needles, of old leaves, of musk and dust. It is the smell of safety. The bear is not just sleeping, it is hibernating. This is a profound biological shift. Listen to the heart. In the summer, it beats with a strong, rapid rhythm, but now it has slowed. It beats with a heavy, deliberate thud, and then silence. A long, stretching silence, and then thud. It is a drum beating in slow motion. The blood moves lazily through the veins. The body has turned down its own thermostat. The fire within burns low, just enough to keep the pilot light on. The breathing is shallow. It is so quiet you would have to lean close to hear it. A slow intake of air, a long, long pause, and then a slow, warm exhale. The steam from the breath rises in the dark and vanishes. There is no need to move. There is no need to hunt. The layer of fat built up over a summer of berries and fish provides everything the body needs. The bear is eating its own energy, slowly, efficiently. It is a self-contained universe. There are no dreams here. The mind has descended into a place deeper than dreaming. It is a gray, fuzzy void of comfort. If a storm rages outside, shaking the trees and breaking the branches, the bear does not turn. If the thunder rolls through the valley, The bear does not flinch. The sleep is too deep. It is a fortress of rest. The weight of the body presses into the earth of the cave floor, heavy and immobile. Gravity pulls it down, anchoring it to the stone. Now, let the image dissolve. Let the stone of the cave melt away. We are moving from the solid earth to the fluid water. We are at the edge of a great northern lake. The surface is flat and white. A sheet of ice, thick and clear as glass, has formed across the entire expanse. It has locked the water in place. It has put a lid on the lake. We slip beneath the ice. We slide into the cold, dark water below. The world here is different. It is a world of muted sound and slow motion. The ice above acts as a skylight, filtering the winter sun into a dim, greenish gloom. The light is weak and watery. It does not warm. It only illuminates the stillness. The water is cold, but it is not frozen. It is dense. It moves slowly, thick and heavy. Down here, the fish are suspended. They do not dart. They do not chase. They hover. Their fins move with microscopic adjustments, just enough to keep them upright in the gloom. They are in a state of torpor. Their hearts, too, have slowed to a crawl. They are drifting ghosts in a liquid world. Everything happens at half speed. A bubble of air releases from the mud at the bottom. It rises, wobbling slowly, drifting up towards the ceiling of ice. It takes a long time to get there. When it hits the underside of the ice, it flattens out and stays there, a silver coin trapped against the glass. The silence is absolute. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of a heavy blanket. The water absorbs all noise. If you were to shout, the sound would be swallowed instantly. There is no wind to rustle the weeds. The long green ribbons of aquatic plants stand straight up in the water, frozen in time. They do not sway. They wait. Down at the very bottom, in the soft, dark mud, life is sleeping even deeper. Frogs and turtles have buried themselves in the silt. They have dug into the lake bed, covering themselves in the soft, oozy blanket of mud. They have shut down almost completely. They do not breathe. They absorb the oxygen they need directly from the water, through their skin. They are one with the mud. They are cold, still, and perfectly safe. The layer of ice above protects them from the wind and the snow. The layer of water insulates them from the freezing air. The layer of mud cradles them. They are wrapped in 3 blankets of nature, sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the underwater world. We rise from the lake now. We drift back towards the shore, moving through the soil again. We find the forest, but we do not look at the branches. We do not look at the trunks standing tall against the gray sky. We look down. We look at the roots. Beneath the forest floor, there is a second forest. It is a tangled, knotted world of wood and bark. The roots are the anchors. They grip the earth with a strength that defies the storm. They wrap around rocks, holding them tight. They weave together, root locking with root, creating a net that holds the hillside in place. In the summer, the sap rushes through these roots like a river. It carries water and sugar up to the leaves. It is a highway of energy. But now, the highway is quiet. The leaves have fallen. The solar panels are gone. The tree has withdrawn its life force. The sap has dropped. It has flowed down from the high branches, down through the trunk, and settled here, deep in the cellar of the roots. The tree is hoarding its energy. It is storing the summer sun in the form of sugar and starch, keeping it safe underground. The roots are heavy with this stored life. They are swollen and dormant. The wood is cold and hard. Think of the connection here. The roots are intimately tied to the earth. They feel the vibrations of the ground. They feel the heavy tread of the deer walking above. They feel the deep rumble of the planet settling. But they do not react. They hold. There is a sense of immense patience in the roots. They have been here for decades, perhaps centuries. They have seen 100 winters. They know that the cold is temporary. They know that the sun will return, but they do not wait with anxiety. They wait with certainty. They are the definition of stability. The wind may whip the upper branches, bending them until they creak, but down here, in the dark soil, there is no movement. The anchor holds. The grip is absolute. The tree sleeps, standing up, its feet buried in the warm, dark comfort of the ground. And now, we go deeper. We go past the seeds. We go past the sleeping bear. We go past the mud of the lake and the tangled roots of the oak. We sink down into the bedrock. We sink into the planet itself. Here, there is only rock, vast, solid layers of stone that have not moved for 1,000,000 years. This is the foundation. This is the floor of the world. It is cool. It is dry. It is incredibly heavy. Gravity is the force that rules here. And gravity is a comfort. It is not a weight that crushes. It is a weight that grounds. It pulls everything toward the center. It holds the oceans in their beds. It holds the mountains against the sky. It holds you. Feel the sensation of being held by this massive planetary gravity. You are stuck to the earth. You are not going to float away. You are not going to fall. You are supported by thousands of miles of rock and iron. The earth is a cradle, spinning slowly in the quiet darkness of space. The planet is moving, but you cannot feel it. To you, it is perfectly still. It is the stillness of eternity. The rock does not breathe. It does not heartbeat. It simply is. It is the ultimate state of rest. To become like the stone is to let go of all tension. It is to stop vibrating. It is to stop trying. Imagine the layers of time pressing down, not as a burden, but as a warm quilt. The Jurassic layer, the Carboniferous layer, the Devonian layer, blankets of time, wrapping the core in history. You are resting on top of all of it, supported by the entire history of the world. There is a silence here that is louder than sound. It is a silence that clears the mind. It wipes away the thoughts of the day, the worries of the week. They cannot exist here in the deep geology. They are too light. They float away like smoke. Only the heavy things remain, the peace, the quiet, the dark. The earth is hibernating in its own way. It turns its face away from the sun, accepting the long night. It allows the ice to form. It allows the snow to pile up. It does not fight the winter. It accepts it. It welcomes the rest. And here, in the deep, quiet embrace of the earth, there is nothing left to do. No more storms to weather. No more walls to build. Just the warm, heavy silence of the ground, holding you safe, holding you still. The fire has burned down to soft embers. The snow has covered the world above. You are safe. You are warm. You are at rest. Thank you for listening to Sleeping Scribe. Sleep well and good night.